Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of healthXaudio. My name is Theodora. I'm one of your co-hosts here.
I'm Adrianne, your other co-host.
So today we're going to be talking about occupational therapy, and we're so grateful to have two guests on with us today. And I'll start off by introducing our first guest. Rhona Anderson is an assistant professor and the director of clinical education in the Department of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy. She is interested in health professionals' education research and specifically student leadership and collaborative leadership. Her clinical research includes occupational-based assessment, specifically a client's perception of performance.
And Dr. Deb Cameron is the International Fieldwork Coordinator in the Department of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy at the University of Toronto. Her research focuses on parent involvement and intervention approaches, the application of new approaches to helping children with cerebral palsy, as well as studies related to youth with intellectual and developmental disabilities and inclusion.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and especially so early in the morning. We are really grateful that you have taken the time out of your day.
Thanks for having us.
We want to get started with our classic warm-up questions. We ask every single person who comes on these questions because they're our favorite. So the first one is, what is your favorite food truck around the area?
I guess I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I have stuck primarily with the hot dog stands, though I would often say that I choose the vegetarian options there. So that would be my contribution.
Yeah, great question. Well, in the last while, I haven't really been downtown too much as we've been doing everything remotely. But the first thought that came to my mind about a food truck is that my favorite food truck is actually not local, but is located in Trinidad, where I do a lot of work with our students who are doing their placements there. And my favorite truck would be the doubles truck that most people traditionally would have for breakfast.
Oh my goodness, I love doubles. I'm Guyanese, and doubles are so good.
Yeah,
we have that
definitely.
in our culture too.
I hate to be uncultured, but what is a double?
just doughy goodness with like some chickpeas in it, and they're so nice and buttery. There's like little thin things. I'll take you to get them. I know a good place.
Okay.
I think.
Okay, I'll hold you to it. That sounds really good. That sounds so good. I need to try one now. And also, I validate the hot dog thing because I literally always go to the hot dog stands on campus. Like, there's this guy who always sets up his stand like to the left of Sid Smith if you're facing it. And like, I've been going to him forever. Like, he's like my go-to hot dog person on campus. And like, it's to the point where like, he recognizes me and he's always like, long time no see. And I once asked him how long he's been here. And he's like, probably longer than you've been alive. And he was off by a year. He started in 2001. I was born in 2000. But that's still a really long time. And I think it's really cool that like, he's a staple on campus because literally like, he'll see like a PhD student. He'll be like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in 4 years. And they'll be like, yeah. So I think that's really cool that like, these vendors are like all part of our campus culture, but I'm very jealous that I have not tried a double yet, and I will get to it. I will hold you to it. I need one. Okay.
You absolutely have to try one for sure.
They're so good. That's Mama's best, by the way, the hot dog stand.
I love him. His food is great.
Okay, so for our next question, what's one of your favorite experiences at U of T?
The restaurant at Hart House, when my husband asked me out for a date, that's where he told me that he was going to take me. It took him a while before we actually got to that spot, but so that has to be my favorite spot.
In terms of memories, I would say some of the pre-pandemic memories at University of Toronto, one that always stands out for me year after year is our research day in June. And so June is a lovely month, of course. So often we have sunshine, and it's an exciting day because students have been working on a research project for at least a year, and it's their time to shine, right? They're the center of attention. They're presenting this work that they contributed to, and it's such a sense of camaraderie and learning as well, which of course, all of us within the department are keen learners. I would also say during the pandemic, another sort of community U of T experience for me has been a colleague who sets up trivia nights. He's a colleague that has roles across the different areas of the university and the rehab sector in particular. So it's a chance for me to feel connected on these trivia nights via Zoom. My brother, who's the editor of the U of T magazine, also joins. And so it's a really nice sort of social gathering, because we have been missing, I would say, a bit of that during the pandemic, with not going on site as often.
That's really great. First of all, I love that your first date was at the Heart House restaurant. That's very cute. Also, like, kind of a staple. I'm sad that Heart House is like half closed right now for construction, but that's super cute. And also, like, I guess like the research day is always great. Like, we have undergrad research days too. It's so great to see like the effort people have been putting in the entire year. And I kind of just wanted to ask, like, from like the vague memory of when I was researching U of T programs, like, are these research projects from the students who choose to have like a subspecialization? Like, you can choose like a extra thing to specialize in. And I remember that you have to take like an extra course or two and do a research project. Or is that those students, or like does every student in the OT program kind of do research alongside their kind of like professional training?
In our program, all of the students do the research. So it's because the OT program is a master's level program, although professional masters, of course. But all of our students do a full year research project. Many of them really enjoy that opportunity to dig a little bit into research. And we're very fortunate, being in Toronto and being in this large academic community, that they not only are working on projects that might be with occupational therapy faculty, but they might also be working with, you know, faculty in other areas. It could be projects based in ethics or community projects with agencies looking at refugees or immigrants. So it's a really great opportunity.
Yeah, and I'll just add that some students generate their own ideas. I'm actually working with a pair of research students right now who had a strong interest in gender diversity and whether our assessment tools well support the needs of persons who identify as gender diverse. And so that's always exciting when students come to you with an idea, but also we have opportunities to submit our own research and look for students who have similar interests to us. And as Deb says, it does bring our community together, our clinical community, our academic community, our students, and that's part of the excitement for me as well.
The gender diversity one, that is very cool. I've been doing a little bit of research myself. That's what I wrote one of my first year papers on, like gender diversity and how the healthcare profession kind of treats people that way. Like, is that like a current project? If so, I'm gonna reach back out to you in June to ask about the project, because I'm actually very curious to see what the results are there. Yeah, because I have many friends who identify as trans, non-binary, and like their experiences with the healthcare system, even in like downtown Toronto, have not been the greatest. So I would love to hear like what is happening right now in OT and like, you know, just like see what the data looks like. So I think I'll definitely be reaching out. One last question before we go to like our main set of questions that we've prepared. I don't know if this is because like I haven't noticed or anything, but can you tell me where the rehab center is?
Yeah, we're on University Avenue, just south of Toronto Rehab in Mount Sinai. So it's 500 University Avenue, a bit north of Dundas. So yeah, we're not in the midst of the main campus, but we are sort of immersed in the whole hospital row, I guess.
Is that the building with like the blue UHN sign next to Mount Sinai that says rehabilitation, like Toronto Rehabilitation on it?
Toronto Rehab is part of University Health Network. That was my previous job before the university. And it's 2 doors down from there. So it's actually even further south than that building. Toronto Rehab itself is a healthcare provider to the university. Yeah.
Clearly, I have not been reading the signs on doors as I walk down University Avenue, but I'll definitely look out for it next time I walk down.
And it's the same building as the speech language pathology, so that might interest you.
Oh,
okay, cool.
Yeah.
So let's go right on to our main questions.
I had the misconception that occupational therapists only help people get back to work. But occupational therapy actually has a very far reach, as I found out. So it's not just about helping people get back to work, but getting them back into the life that they want to live and allowing them to engage in the activities they'd like to take part in. So what are some things you think occupational therapists help with that most people wouldn't normally think of occupational therapists doing?
I practiced in an inpatient rehabilitation setting, and there's been such a variety of performance areas that I've worked on with my clients. So, you know, feeding pets, operating their camera, returning to driving, even cleaning the bathroom. Some people want to work on that, and the building that you mentioned, Toronto Rehab, is well set up for that. There's lots of rooms where people can engage in those real life activities. But really what I wanted to pick out from what you said was that you used the phrase, I think, engage in activities. And that reminds me of a light bulb moment for me in my growth as a professional. So I had just moved into more of a clinical educator role at the hospital, and I was taking a continuing professional development course actually through University of Toronto, and it was shortly after one of our foundational books was released. We call it Enabling Occupation 2. Or enabling to, sometimes people refer to it as. It introduced the idea of occupational engagement. So when you say engagement in activities, it's sort of different than performance, right? My colleague, I was telling her about what I was learning about engagement and how people can have and achieve very meaningful goals that aren't about what they do, but actually what they participate in. And that definition can be quite broad, right? So she talked to me about a client of hers. He was well known in his family as the host of the family. He brought all family members together. He'd make these elaborate meals. That was his role within the family, to really bring people together and share in their community, their family community. He had a very significant stroke, and his recovery was very slow. And when the occupational therapist, my colleague, was working with him on performance goals, like being able to cook something, it led to a lot of frustration for him because he was so far away from where he had been previously. But what was really exciting was this shift to the idea of engagement meant that she could shift with him the goal, and he could plan out the task, he could invite people, he could engage with others in the way he did before, and that was the meaningful part for him. So it's a little bit more conceptual to think about things that way in occupational therapy, but what her intervention changed to was modifying the environment, making sure that he had access to all the spaces and that he could still organize tasks and call people and engage with them in a social interaction way that was appropriate and effective. So that was a really nice story, I think, about something you may not see OTs doing.
Yeah, that's a great story. I love that one, Rhona. When I'm talking to people and to, future OT students that might be interested in the profession, one of the things that I'm always mentioning to them is that within the profession of OT, it's so broad and so varied that you can work with everyone from literally sort of the very premature babies all the way up to, end of life care. And you can be working with people who, as Rhona talked about, who've had an injury or a stroke, a car accident, etc. But you can also be working with individuals who were perhaps born with their disability, or they have a learning issue or challenge, children with cerebral palsy, or on the autism spectrum. My clinical background has always been working with children. So often I had the opportunity to work with young children with developmental coordination disorder, or on the spectrum, or children with CP. When Rhona was telling her story, it reminded me of one of my favorite stories, which is in using a particular occupational therapy intervention approach, which is called co-op, or cognitive orientation to daily occupational performance for its long term. It involves very specifically focusing on goals that are identified by the person that you're working with. So in the case of this young boy, his goal was he wanted to learn to ride a bike. He had been trying with his family, who were very supportive and anxious to do whatever they could do to help him. But it had been several years of them trying to help him ride his bike unsuccessfully. And so this was his goal. And we worked over a number of about 8 or 10 sessions on the bike riding, and using the co-op approach, which helps the child or adult to use a problem-solving approach called goal, plan, do, check, to set a goal, and then you help them to make a plan as to how they might reach their goal. They try it, they check it, see if it worked, and if it didn't, they try to figure out how to add to the plan. And the OT works along with them to try to guide them to strategies that might help. I was absolutely thrilled one day to get an email from this boy's father, and he said that the last year the school had a bike parade, and his son had refused to enter the bike parade because he couldn't ride his bike, and he obviously didn't want to show his friends that he wasn't able to ride his bike. But he emailed to tell me that this year, not only had the child ridden his bike in the parade, but he had actually led the parade of all of the kids at his school. So it was just such a wonderful moment to hear the difference that working with him made for him in a very concrete way. The father went on to say, that he really had trouble figuring out why something that looked so simple, so the interventions that we were using didn't look very complex to him, but had been so successful. But he understood that there was, a lot more to it than it appeared on the surface. But it was a wonderful opportunity.
Those are two very amazing stories. I'm glad that you guys are able to make such a difference in that way. It's amazing what you guys do. When I was reading this story, I became very interested. People are very grateful to be helped, but do you ever encounter people who are sometimes more hesitant to see an occupational therapist?
Yeah, I would say that for sure that can sometimes be challenging. I'm always reminding the students that we have to consider the fact that when we see somebody in a rehabilitation situation, we're often asking them to focus and spend time on things they can't do. So if you're working with a child, and a goal that is often a goal, at least for parents and hopefully sometimes for children, is to improve something like their printing. So a lot of children, for example, with developmental coordination disorder or a physical impairment, printing is a very challenging task. So we are spending time with them and asking them to focus on things that they don't do well, that they struggle with and are hard. That's why I think that good OTs and other therapists spend a lot of time thinking of ways to make these activities, as engaging, as fun, as meaningful as they can. As much as we try to focus on strengths, and we do, these goals they're setting are for things that are giving them trouble. So it can be hard sometimes to engage them in sessions, and then particularly if we want them to practice things afterwards, then we're asking them again to focus on things that are challenging.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with everything Deb has said. I'm not sure what more I have to add, though. When you asked about that hesitancy, I can think of one client that I was really quite stumped by for multiple reasons. It was very complex, and it was, it was one of those things I still think back on, and this is probably around 2004. So, a long time ago, and it still sticks with me. But what made this situation complex was, first of all, he had a presentation after a stroke that I hadn't seen before. I think it's called alien hand syndrome, if I remember correctly. And so he had movement in his hand, but it would often do things unintentionally. Like if you think of the name of it, it was like he wasn't really controlling it. So that made really complex. And part of what my role was at the time was also in planning for discharge home. We'd often go into a client's home. And what I didn't realize going into his home was that, he would have been classified, I think, as a hoarder by many people's standards. So when we entered his home, we found, piles and piles, like just a pathway through piles and piles of belongings. And so, that really just was challenging, and trying to partner with him in a positive way, I guess, helped me grow. I did a lot of partnership with others in that, because again, it was a lot that I hadn't encountered before. But I would say the vast majority of clients that I've worked with are really happy to be participating and working towards their goals. And I think that's really important as we espouse being client-centered and we ask, what is important to you? And generally people respond well to that.
Thank you so much for the heartwarming stories. It's really great to see the impact that you guys have on these clients' lives. Something that's kind of been just burning on the back of my mind is to do with what being an occupational therapist means. There's a lot of jobs that work kind of in the rehabilitation area of movement, such as being a kinesiologist or a physical therapist. Can you explain what makes an occupational therapist considered an occupational therapist, and what are the distinctions between y'all and other professions that do similar things? And I'm sure y'all work very closely with these people. Kind of if you need to see one person, you kind of want to see all of them. So I would love to know what makes you different, and maybe a little bit on how you collaborate with these people who kind of do similar things.
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe I'll tackle the first part of the question, and then Rhona can maybe tackle the second part, because I know she's fabulous with teams and teamwork, etc. But it's a question we often get asked, is sort of, so what is different about OT? How are we different from some of the other professions? And I think that for me, I would zero in on the primary difference being that we really do focus on occupations. In other words, we focus on whatever it is that our client needs to do. So it might be, taking care of themselves or getting back to work, or, what they want to do. So it can often be, like bike riding or a leisure activity that they really want to get back to, similar to Rhona's story about, the fellow wanting to plan some social gatherings. And so we really try in all circumstances as much as possible to be focusing on the actual occupation or activity that they want to do, rather than perhaps focusing specifically on strengthening a certain set of muscles, or say a speech language pathologist might be focusing on either, pronunciation of certain words, or trying to help them develop more language. We're going to really focus on what is it that client wants to do, and how can we help them to get there. We feel that we are looking at a much more global picture, a bigger picture of that person, adult or child, within their bigger environment, and how can we help them to accomplish that specific goal. Sometimes it is the environment that needs to change and not the person, or the person is only able to change to a certain extent because they've got physical or cognitive or mental health issues or challenges, but you still want them to be successful. So you start looking at what the environment around them, that might be their family or supportive others. It might be their actual physical location. Do they need adaptations to their home to allow them to actually meet those goals and do those activities? Perhaps they need adaptive equipment in the kitchen, or they need a ramp to get into the house, or, they need wheel-trans to be able to get them to meet their friends for a coffee or a tea. So it's really that larger picture and those activities and occupations that we focus on.
Oh, what can I add to that? I guess we'll move on a bit to the idea of team, and certainly I have been so privileged to work with fantastic teams. Now, I think that I represent very much hospital-based care, and so I want to also acknowledge that what you're maybe not hearing about as much from me anyway, or even Deb to some degree, is some of the varieties of teams, right? If you're in a social environment, a team member might be a different type of worker, like a behavioral support worker, or something that might not be often recognized as a team member, but I just can't speak to that as effectively. So who are my team members and experiences in the work that I've done in both acute care settings, inpatient rehab, outpatient rehab? I would say that, as you identified, I think, Theodora, our closest team members are often the physiotherapist and the speech language pathologist, and we're all working with the individuals and their families potentially on goals, on what often is classified as function, the very, the blanket term function. With some of our clients, we're actually seeing them together, but we're both offering a different lens. So we might come in and partner and say that the goal is getting dressed, and they are, for that, if they're in a wheelchair, it's some wheelchair mobility to the closet, opening the closet door, reaching for the clothes that are there, choosing their clothes, laying it out for wherever they're going to get dressed, and so on. Where the physiotherapist might contribute to that would be facilitating the movement of the limbs as it's progressing, or if the client needs to do in standing, supporting normal movement as much as possible, so ensuring that they're using most appropriate muscles for the task. The occupational therapist, the lens that we might take would be pulling together some of those other items I mentioned, like choosing the clothes and having information that they can make those best choices. It can be thinking about the environment and how can they lay things out so that the space is organized and doesn't result in other challenges. So that's sort of one example. And then I think also concretely, there's a lot of conversations that happen in teams through rounds, through care planning conferences, meeting with families. So we all need to be prepared about how we're working collaboratively for the same ultimate goal, which are the client's goals.
Thank you so much for the explanation. I particularly think the example with getting dressed gave me like a really good kind of interpretation of what the difference is, or like what you guys do specifically. And that's really cool that like you guys are the ones who are out here being like, what can we do to make things better, things easier for you? Like, what are the goals that you want met? And then physical therapy is like, to meet said goals, what are the muscles that you need, or something like that. And I think it's really great that all these healthcare professionals essentially like work together to help make something happen for someone. And that's also like particularly why I really love the U of T healthcare programs, is because like from what I know is that like there is a thing that they make students do. It's just like collaborating together with different like healthcare students. Like you got the doctor, you got the potential MD, you got this SLP, you got the OT, and you're all together in a group trying to solve like a case together. And I think that's super important because like that's how real life works. Like you're not going to be able to solve everything on your own and stuff. It's really great that like to see that, that's what happens in healthcare, and like the training that we do obviously is working towards making sure that like we get practice in real life situations.
I think you raised a really good point, because the interprofessional education programs that you were referring to are definitely carried out in many schools across the country, but I would say U of T has a particularly strong emphasis on training students to work in teams, to work interprofessionally. All of the students in our program attend a number of sessions, as you say, where they get to take a case and work with a real team of other students and see the roles that others have. It's such a great opportunity to find out what other people's roles are, because you, as you say, you sort of have your ideas of what others might do, and then you get a particular case. Students are learning, I had no idea maybe that that's what a nutritionist might do, or this is what the role of the social worker might be in this case, or nursing, etc. You really gain a great appreciation of how everybody is contributing.
I would, my example was very much just with physiotherapy, but I could give you an example of how I've collaborated with a pharmacist before, or the nutritionist before, a speech language pathologist, nurse, a physician. Like it absolutely applies. Thank you.
So as a transition to kind of our next question, I wanted to ask, in regards to client goals, do clients come to you with goals, or in order to work with an OT, like do they have to have like a goal in mind, like the kid who wants to ride the bike, or is it like they come to you and you guys can come up with goals together to achieve?
I would say that you see a wide variety in terms of that. So I would say absolutely you get some people who come and they have these very specific goals that they want you to work on. I remember actually one that struck me as interesting was I was working with a young child, and the mother said, I have 2 goals for you to work on with her in therapy. I want you to teach her to open the door from the laundry room to the rest of the house, because this child kept going into the laundry room and closing the door behind her and then wasn't able to get out and was very frustrated. She wanted me to help her child learn how to drink from a juice box, because that was sort of a nice way of keeping the juice contained, but her daughter did not know how to suck through a straw. I was just very interested because they were very specific goals, and often you don't get a client that has such great ideas as to exactly what they want to work on. Sometimes there's an assessment tool in occupational therapy called the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, or COPM. And it's a very kind of open-ended tool where you can work with the client to help them try to figure out their goals. And one of the strategies that you sometimes do with that tool is to have the client, or maybe the child's parent, kind of walk through a typical day, for example, and talk about, how is the child feeding themselves when they get up? Are they able to dress themselves? What do they do after that? What do they like to play with? Do they interact with others, etc.? That often gives families or individual clients a really great idea of where things are falling apart for them, the parts of the day that are going really well and the parts where they're really struggling. So that can often be quite effective in terms of helping them to, come up with a goal. I think that one of the interesting things is that if we try to work on something that the client or child doesn't feel is important, it can often really backfire on us. And I remember a story from one of my colleagues where the teacher and the parent really wanted this child to make her handwriting bigger. For whatever reason, she had this almost microscopic handwriting that was very difficult to actually see. The handwriting itself was lovely, but you couldn't see it. It was so small. And so they wanted her to work on this. She did not want to work on this goal, but they convinced her that, she would work on it. So at the end of the time with intervention, the child's handwriting was larger and she had met her goal. But as soon as therapy was finished, she went back to doing exactly what she had been doing before with her handwriting, because for whatever reason, it was not a goal of hers. She did not see the problem with it, and she wasn't going to continue to work on it. So I think we've all had that experience of maybe having the goals set by somebody else in the client's life, maybe a parent, but maybe a spouse or a significant other who says, this is what I really think they should work on. But if you can't get buy-in from the individual themselves, often it's not going to be very successful.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. As much as you want to improve a certain behavior, if it's abnormal, the person has to want to improve this as well. Actually, that kind of lends into the idea of self-assessment of your abilities. I think you did a lot of research into that, Rhona. So how often do clients overestimate or underestimate what they can do?
Yeah, so I did my post-professional master's in the early 2000s on assessment awareness of disability. And it was a tool that had been used with certain populations, and I was looking at its use with persons with acquired brain injury. And so by acquired brain injury, or ABI, I mean stroke, a brain injury as a result of maybe a fall or a motor vehicle collision, even a gunshot wound, a near drowning, anoxia, a brain tumor. So that was the population that I was working with at the time. And so the research stemmed from my clinical experience, which, as I think you identified, was that sometimes a person's ability to assess their performance or their awareness of how they were performing differed from what others saw. So others being family members that knew them well, even therapists, even if we didn't know them well, we could see that their evaluation of their performance differed than what we were seeing. And in that population, it most commonly differed in that a client is overestimating their abilities. And they might do this for many very good, appropriate, logical reasons. It could be that they really haven't had an opportunity yet to do something they used to do very well. And so their self-image was that, oh yeah, I can do that. Oh yeah, there would be no problem with me returning to driving. I've always been a good driver. And so they may not see that their reaction time has slowed because they haven't been put in that situation yet, or see that their decision making, or that they have a lack of vision in part of their scope of vision. And it can also be a protective mechanism, right? To stay well after an injury, you've maybe had many losses, and to acknowledge that part of those losses is your ability to competently perform things that are important to you. That can be very difficult to deal with sort of emotionally and psychologically. But it can also be as a result of the brain injury itself. Like there's part of the frontal lobe that affects your awareness. Why is that important? Well, I think it stems from the conversations we were having about goals. And if someone doesn't see that there's a need to work on something to improve either efficiency or their safety or effectiveness at a task, if they don't see that need, it can have an impact on what tasks they can return to. And that could include even just returning home and being confident that they will make good decisions at home and they're not at risk for making mistakes that would jeopardize their own safety or the safety of others. It certainly would impact return to work, right? If you have a colleague who thinks they're performing well, but they keep making a lot of errors and it's affecting your work with them, that can also have a significant impact on not just the individual, but the whole work environment as well. You asked, I think, also about underestimating abilities. In my practice, I saw that less frequently, but I did see it from time to time. It might be a person actually who's performing quite well, but they're not performing quite at the level that they're used to. And so they're starting to feel frustrated because it's not meeting the high standard of performance that they're used to. That can be more of a challenge sometimes to address, but it's really important to recognize that as well, because you can imagine yourself in that person's shoes. It could lead to their frustration as well, and potentially lead to depression and other issues that will affect their daily lives.
It was a really great explanation, and I can kind of like relate to the people who underestimate themselves. Like, I have a learning disability. I have really high expectations, a history of really high perfectionism for myself, and like whenever I can't meet them, it's like really, really disappointing to me, or like I feel really bad about it. But then like when people point out to me like, oh, you've actually like made 90% of it, or like, you know, compared to the general population, you've actually done pretty well, to me, like, then I'm like, oh, well, like maybe I am doing pretty well. And like, it's good to have those types of people around me who can like ground me and like show me that it's okay that you didn't meet their expectations, or like your expectations were impossible in the first place. I think that's really helpful. I can imagine that it takes a huge role in occupational therapy, considering a lot of these people are coming from accidents and will not ever be able to perform as well as they used to. On the vein of like Deb's research, how important do you think it is to have family members or loved ones participate specifically in a client recovery? We wanted to also touch upon, Deb, your research on how parents contribute to their child's own progress in occupational therapy as well.
I think just to touch on sort of the way you started, I think for both Rhona and I, we've worked a lot where the issues are perhaps more physical in nature, but I'm always telling the students that, you know, even if I'm working with a child with a physical disability like cerebral palsy, for example, with them and their families, at least half of what I feel that I'm doing with them is what falls into more, you know, mental health or social support, etc. Because I think even when you may be focusing on how to help that child play with a toy or ride a bike or print or whatever it is, there's also so much focus on what's happening for the child and the family from that mental health or social support. I worked a lot with early preschoolers. For parents like that, they may be dealing with, for example, the diagnosis of their child as having a particular disability, because it might take a while for the differences to be seen and noticed, and then a while for them to get an accurate diagnosis of what's going on, helping the families to manage that diagnosis and that idea that the child's development that they thought they were going to be seeing might not be that way, that they are on a very different path than the one that they envisioned. Helping them to cope with that can be a big part of what you're doing, even while you may be focusing on how to help them learn how to feed themselves or whatever. There's definitely a lot of that. From the perspective of your question about sort of parents and others in the client's life, I always like to ask students to remember that even if we have the chance to see a particular individual fairly regularly, which we don't always in, the current healthcare situation, either a cost perspective or just a resource perspective, you're not necessarily seeing them super regularly. But even if you are, and you're the best therapist in the world, whatever that actually would be, we don't have magic hands and we don't have magic skills. You need to be able to work with either the rest of the team, as Rhona pointed out, so that others are also helping with those goals when you're not around, or particularly with parents or spouses or children of perhaps the older adults that are having challenges and their children might be very involved in supporting them. You need that team of people to continue to help the client to work on things in order to make some gains sustainable in the long run. So I think that it's very important to look for those supports around the client. Sometimes it might be a teacher, sometimes it might be a personal support worker, a behavior therapist. There's a lot of people that might be interacting with your client. At the same time, I think it is very important to recognize that you need to be thinking about how much pressure that you're putting on others, and whether or not they are able to handle those extra activities. I used to say, somewhat jokingly, but somewhat semi-seriously, that when I worked for a children's rehabilitation center, I could tell which of the therapists had their own children by the length of the home program that they would provide to the parents, because those who were parents themselves understood that there was a lot going on in a child's life, even above and beyond any therapy needs that they might have. And so they would try to make their requests more reasonable, and others would give, the 10-page home program that, there was no way that most parents would be able to do it. And not only that, it would make them feel very guilty if they could not do it. How much to involve people and how much to ask of surrounding people needs to be carefully considered as well. So I think there's definite benefits to having lots of supportive people around, but need to consider what it's also possible for them to manage.
I think I definitely see what you're saying from my experience working with an SLP. Like, since a lot of our kids come to us before a diagnosis is formally done, which I applaud the parents for seeing it in their kids very early and like bringing their kids in at the age of 2, being like, I don't think they speak normally, so I'm just going to put them in first. Like, I really think that's really great that parents are, taking the initiative to do that. But with us, like, we always kind of do a lot of like nudging parents towards getting their child diagnosed. And it's usually pretty obvious when a kid is going to get diagnosed with autism, but like, I feel like a lot of the job that I see the people I work with do is like supporting parents once they get the diagnosis and helping them process the information and like helping them see that like just because your kid has autism doesn't mean like they can't live a fulfilling life. They definitely have a lot of things they can do. I kind of did like a semester in Asia. In Asia, I think it's kind of a little worse because oftentimes when your kid is diagnosed with a disability, like they blame it on the mom, and then like the mom becomes a single mom. The divorce happens and now they're a single mom to a child that needs help. And like, I think the emotional aspect, being aware of like what a mother can do or what the support system can do is like really, really, really important, because these parents are also going through a tough time, or like any of the support that they have are also going through a tough time, just seeing their loved ones be in this situation. So really grateful that you guys do a lot of this support. It's heartwarming and like definitely needed in this community for sure.
I don't have too much more to contribute, but I would want to highlight some of our colleagues' work within the department. So Dr. Jill Cameron has done a lot of work about caregivers and stress, and she's done that a lot with adults, caregiver adults with persons who need support. Dr. Yami Handani, she's done a lot with mental health, because of course, although it's not my area of practice, OTs work completely in mental health settings like Center for Addiction and Mental Health. They work with addictions, they work with eating disorders, people with psychoses. So there's a whole part of the OT role that we can't really talk to with the expertise as some of our colleagues would.
I feel like from all the stories I've heard, it feels like the rewarding parts of your job are pretty obvious. But I guess I think I'll ask you anyway.
I love the relationships that you can build with people, and being able to feel like you are in some small way kind of contributing to the gains that they're making, and sort of the privilege that people give you to let you work alongside them and partner with them. It's such a wonderful feeling. Depending on the kind of job you're doing in occupational therapy, sometimes you have shorter relationships with people, and sometimes you get the opportunity to work with them over a long period of time. For me, it's that relationship that you can have, and that partnership as you try to support people and help them to reach their own goals.
Yeah, I would say it's the privilege of being a part of someone's life, even as Deb said, for short periods of time or long periods of time. But when people partner with you, it can be very rewarding. And then I'd say in my current role, working with students and site, it feels very valuable to see how you're shaping the next generation of practicing clinicians and researchers and leaders within our healthcare system. We have some occupational therapists that are in senior leadership positions all throughout Toronto. So it's really exciting to see that growth and to get to work with all these partners.
I'll just add one more thing, because you brought up the student perspective. I'm actually been retired from the department supposedly for over 3 years, but I have maintained until later this year the role of still working with students on international placements, which has been a passion of mine for over 20 years now. With the pandemic, we actually did quite an interesting switch to having our students do virtual international placements. And so we're fortunate enough to have partners in India, in Trinidad, in the Philippines, in Cameroon. And so our students, instead of doing a placement in a local facility, have been able to partner over Zoom and over WhatsApp, etc., with our partners in these countries, and actually do some assessment and intervention with clients there. Our poor students having to be doing this, some of them at 10 or 11 at night because of the time zone differences. But it's been a great experience. We just had 5 of our students, 4 doing a placement in Trinidad and 1 doing a placement with our India partners, who've just finished their first fieldwork placement. Normally they can't do that internationally because we like them to wait until second year, but because it's virtual, we had this opportunity. And to watch those students dive into working with the teachers and the families in these settings, the students have been so excited with the opportunities that they've had. They were just telling us the other day they only were on placement in this instance for 4 weeks with their facility, but they felt like they had made these relationships with the children and the parents, and they were going to miss them so terribly even after 4 weeks, because they felt that they'd had this opportunity to try and make a difference. So it was just really exciting to listen to the students and their passion, their energy, their enthusiasm. Brightened my day for sure.
I think your experiences and what you've shared so far with regards to students perfectly ties into, I guess, our final question here before we end the interview, which is, as educators, what is your vision for students? Like, as an educator, what are you hoping students get out of your classes, apart from, like, the practical stuff they have to learn, but like, what mindset do you wish to, bestow on these future OTs, and like, what do you hope that they bring into their work practices, I guess?
I hope they bring a lot of excitement to their practice, that they see themselves as leaders and key contributors in both health and social systems. I hope they practice top of scope so that they have opportunities to be really innovative. So what I mean by that is some of the things that only occupational therapists can do really well. So those are the types of things I hope for our graduates, that they really practice in an evidence-based way, keeping on top of research. Their practices are best practices that they go on to teach future students. So they really integrate that sort of care, research, and education mantra that we hear from so many of our partners.
That's fabulous, Rhona, and I think captures a lot of what I think as well. And I think that there's a huge role for our future graduates to really advocate as well. So we talk a lot about advocacy, but I think the idea that we really need to try to partner with our clients as much as possible and really advocate as much as we can at the systems level as well as the individual level. So I think that as OTs, we love working with individuals and with our clients and their families, but there's a huge role for us to play in trying to advocate at the systems or structural levels to change practices around sort of employment of persons with disabilities, or to change accessibility. There's many exciting innovations around how to make our society more accessible and equitable for all. As wonderful as it is to focus on that individual relationship, we can't make differences in society unless we also tackle some of these real barriers that our clients might face in trying to reach their goals. So I see wonderful things in our current students. I think that they're coming in with such interesting backgrounds, with this being a master's program, and they can come in with sort of any degree that they like. We're seeing people who were teachers who are coming into the profession, or we're seeing people who took psychology or kinesiology, or in some cases English or music. So they bring in such fabulous backgrounds that I hope that we can work with them to integrate all the wonderful potential that they're bringing in.
I think that was a very great ending to our interview today. And I definitely think advocacy is very important. We've talked to multiple researchers, and like, often y'all are at the forefront of policy change and like convincing governments to do things. And I think that is so very important. You guys are making a real impact here that really affects a large amount of people. And it's so great to hear that you guys are pushing students to, go out there and be like, we have to make this change. It will make society better. It will make it more equitable. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for answering our questions. Thank you for your great stories. And to our audience, thank you so much for listening to our episode today. We hope you had a great time. I hope you learned a lot. And I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.